I am here with Cern Basher again, and he has promised to provide yet more entertainment for sure, but yet in this particular case, something that is going to be a little different.
I think so. I'm hoping to bring just a little bit of insight today.
Insight. Okay, insight.
Not just comedy and not just some filler slides, but some excellent insight.
Well, I would say something like for a change, except I'm the one that's inviting you on. So I must think that you're always bringing insight of some type.
I'm sure you do, Randy. I'm sure you do. Yeah. Yeah. Probably not every time, but maybe occasionally.
And I understand that this insight today is even going to be controversial of a sort.
I think for many it is because when I mention a certain word, people's brains are going to flip one way or the other.
I see.
And they're either going to flip on for a few, and for most, if not many, well, sorry, for many, if not most, that's a better way of saying it, their brains will flip off.
I see. Okay.
I'm already losing them here because I'm
Yeah, yeah,
not
yeah.
building this up
They've
right.
already turned off. Yeah.
Yeah. But please, I ask you to give this conversation a chance
Okay.
because I think this is important from a technology perspective more so than what you currently think about this particular thing. Okay. And I'm dancing around this for a purpose, for a reason.
Okay. All right. All right. All right.
All right. Shall we begin?
Yeah. I'd like you to open the box now so we can see what's inside.
See what's inside. All right. We finished here in our last show.
Yes, it's
And
true.
I think this is a good cartoon to kind of start with. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I think for a lot of people with this last election, they're they have been sort of woken up to the idea that media doesn't always tell them the truth, spins a narrative in a certain way that may or may not be accurate. Okay.
You
A
know,
lot a
you're,
lot of
you're
us realized that before the election. Many people now are coming to that realization now.
okay. Okay. I was just going to say, I think there's been, let's see, I think I stopped my subscription to the LA Times 30 years ago, to Wired Magazine 15 years ago. So there's been
Yeah.
a lot of mainstream media that I have tossed in the trash many, many years ago. But you're right. I think there's another sliver of the population that might have been shocked that 60 Minutes might have been so duplicitous.
Yeah. So I'm trying to stay away from the political element of this, but I think this last election certainly gives us, more evidence of that.
Right.
And whether you came to this realization early or late doesn't matter. But what I want you to do is keep this in mind when we talk about this next topic,
Okay.
because depending on where you are in this next topic, it's going to involve a similar process of changing the narrative, of challenging maybe what you think about what you think you know about this subject.
Hmm.
All
Hmm.
right. Without further ado, this was a recent post of mine,
Okay.
and I'm just going to read this for you. Imagine you were the CEO of a tech titan like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Facebook, or Apple. Okay.
Okay.
Your company is exceptionally well positioned across multiple arenas, powered by robust digital business models and aggressively pursuing AI-driven opportunities. Right? All those companies are.
Yep.
Your company is immensely profitable, boasting vast reserves of cash on its balance sheet. The future appears exceedingly bright.
Okay.
Yet, a formidable challenge looms, and that's cybersecurity.
Hmm.
So, in spite having invested hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions, to safeguard your digital assets, your company is under relentless attack. Every second of every day, hackers, spammers, fraudsters, and even nation states attempt to breach your defenses to rob your company and your customers. Right?
Right.
How do we protect this? Well, we deploy software security measures are deployed, but their effectiveness is often short-lived. We've got to kind of keep staying one step ahead of the hackers and
Yep.
spammers and fraudsters.
Yep.
And the problem is, in a digital world, it's pretty easy and cheap for your adversaries to spin up a force of thousands of computers and unleash them on your company. And so I ask, is this situation hopeless? Well, what if a new technology came along that allowed you to physically constrain your attackers, right? Imagine you're a banker and all your cash is laying out on the countertops, and people come into the bank and just pick it up and run away.
That's not good.
What do? Well, you put the cash in a vault and you put bars on the doors and you have armed guards and you physically constrain people from taking your cash.
Right.
How do you do that in cyberspace?
Hmm.
Because more and more what we have is our digital assets. Even our money is digitally represented now.
Right.
Right. So I asked the question, would you invest in that technology? And I think the obvious answer is, yeah, that would be a wise thing to do. If such a technology existed to physically constrain attackers in cyberspace.
Yes.
And I'm suggesting that this technology already exists. In fact, it's patiently waiting for you to discover and deploy it.
Okay.
Okay. And thankfully, just today, there was a series of posts that helped make my case here.
Oh, good.
Okay. And so what I would like to do is lead you through them.
All right.
And now, the guy that wrote these is a guy that wrote this thesis from MIT a couple of years ago now. It's called Soft War. It's titled A Novel Theory on Power Projection and the National Strategic Significance of Bitcoin. And there, I just mentioned the word.
A word.
Brains have just flipped. Okay. Pretend I didn't say the word Bitcoin.
Oh, okay.
Please stick with me here. Okay. I want to show you how this is actually a technology, not money. It's a technology that may be the best form of digital security that we've ever invented. And if it is true, then it's profound.
Okay, so just to help unconfuse me, Bitcoin is a derivative of a technology called blockchain, right?
Bitcoin uses a technology called blockchain as part of its package of technology.
And so if we're talking about things that don't have to do with money, are we better off to be talking about blockchain, or is this specifically Bitcoin that's going to do the work that you're requiring?
It's just Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the only technology of all the crypto assets.
I see. Okay.
Bitcoin is the only one that's worth talking about in this regard.
Interesting. Wow.
All the others do not have the same features that make Bitcoin useful as digital security.
Okay. All right.
So it makes the conversations really easy in terms of that regard. Now, I'm not suggesting that the other crypto assets have no value. They can be used for different things. Right? They're different technologies.
Got it.
Okay. Jason Lowery, I believe, my understanding was asked by RFK Jr. To serve in his administration should he win. Well, he didn't win, but he's aligned himself with Trump.
Right.
Jason has indicated on X that he's going to be moving to the Washington, D.C. area relatively soon.
Wow.
I think it's highly likely that Jason is appointed in some role where, Trump has talked about this too, in terms of having a national strategic reserve for Bitcoin.
Right.
Jason wrote this today on his X account and said policy recommendations. He's saying, even with a friendly crypto policy, the U.S. is vastly underestimating Bitcoin's national strategic importance by viewing it solely as a financial asset.
Okay.
Okay. So again, stop thinking of Bitcoin as money. The problem is it's got the word coin in its name. We'd be better off to think of Bitcoin as bit power instead of Bitcoin. So as I'm talking about Bitcoin, maybe substitute that word for bit power in your mind.
Power meaning energy, or power?
Yes.
Okay.
Physical energy, power. Yes. So we'll come to the explanation in a minute, Randy, about how Bitcoin can physically constrain attackers, much in the way that armed security guards or a U.S. Navy fleet can physically constrain attackers.
Okay.
It's very similar in that regard. Let me just go through this with you, and then we'll get to some of the details. he's saying here that Bitcoin represents the use of physical power in watts to secure cyberspace. It's the first technology we've ever had that can do that. Okay, so for the first time, people can achieve cyber sovereignty by physically securing information and digital assets across cyberspace in a trustless peer-to-peer way, similar to how we secure land, sea, air, and space. Okay.
Okay.
This is a revolutionary advance in computer theory, and its strategic value is seriously undervalued. All right. He's saying here too, now in his third bullet point, it's unacceptable that the Department of Defense, once a leader in cybersecurity, isn't more proactive in exploring the cybersecurity benefits of reusable proof-of-work networks like Bitcoin. We should be leading this effort and actively funding research in this area, yet currently nothing is being done. So he's sounding the alarm, and he's been doing so now for a few years, to his military superiors that we need to act. We can't fall behind in this new digital security technology.
Right.
Okay. And I think finally now he has the ear of people that matter, that can actually do something about this. All right. Point number 4. U.S. policymakers need clearer guidance on the difference between reusable proof-of-work networks like Bitcoin and other crypto or blockchain technologies, which are fundamentally different. Okay. Whatever amount of Bitcoin the U.S. plans to add to its strategic reserves isn't enough. Once we recognize that Bitcoin equals bit power, we realize that holding only 1 million units is insufficient for U.S. needs. Okay? Which I think has been the target that people, like maybe Trump has talked about or so on in terms of its strategic reserve. And he goes on to say that U.S. must secure access to Bitcoin, the world's largest reusable proof-of-work network, by building basically a U.S. hash force. Right? We have a, Air Force, an Army, right? Navy. We need a hash force. Okay? A branch of the U.S. military in cyberspace to protect U.S. interests in cyberspace.
So just to, try to keep wrapping my head around this, because this is really, deep. We have a strategic reserve of gold. We have a strategic reserve of oil.
Yeah.
The strategic reserve of gold is pretty much pure money. It's a way to manage the value of gold worldwide, because we can either release we can either take on more or release it, sell it, buy it, in order to, if the price of gold was going crazy, we could start selling off lots of gold from our reserve if we thought that would work, as we have done a few times with oil. So this is a third kind of strategic reserve that you're going to now explain how a digital proof of work asset could also serve in this regard.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's different than a strategic reserve of gold and oil. You can view those as commodities, I suppose. Some refer to Bitcoin as a commodity, and that's fine, but this is actually more than that. Okay. It's a security technology, is really the way Jason wants us to think about it.
Okay.
Okay. So let's kind of break these down into some maybe bite-sized chunks here.
Okay.
So Bitcoin is a way of digitizing physical power. Okay. So if you think about how Bitcoin is produced, all the computers that run the Bitcoin network worldwide, every 10 minutes, compete with one another to produce that next Bitcoin.
Right.
The competition uses an incredible amount of power. The main narrative against Bitcoin is it's too power hungry.
Right.
Why are we wasting all this energy on a coin?
Exactly.
Okay. You could make the same argument. Why do we waste all the energy that we have on aircraft carrier battle groups?
Okay.
Right? What a waste of energy, Randy, to have a naval fleet operating around the world.
Okay.
Well, I think most people realize that would be a pretty dumb thing to say. Right? There's a reason that the United States has such a powerful military. We need to protect our interests around the world. If we didn't, people would come along and take away our assets.
Right.
The reason that Russia was able to invade Ukraine was Ukraine couldn't protect itself. Right? They couldn't fight back, at least initially.
If they had spent money on enough atoms of some kind of security products,
Yeah.
then Russia might not have dared to cross the line.
Right.
Okay.
And so intuitively in the physical world, we get the importance of a strong military. Now, we might quibble about how we use it and so on, whatever, but I think we all understand the importance of having a strong military to protect our interests,
Right.
whether it's our territory or our assets around the world. Okay. Same thing in cyberspace. How do we protect the value that's now in networks around the world? AI systems, right? Or even your email that's in Google or Hotmail or wherever it may be. How do we protect all that from attack? Well, we have the ability now to use this technology to protect it. Because in order for people to access it, they would have to expend a lot of power, a lot of watts to beat the system. It's no longer just cracking a code, a software code, and getting the password. It's actually spending tons of energy to crack this and beat the system for the ability to get the next amount of Bitcoin or to make an entry on the ledger to change who owns Bitcoin. Right. So in this way, we can use the Bitcoin technology as a way to physically constrain what's happening in the digital world.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, esoteric.
Yeah.
So, am I going to be spending some of those watts in order to create the security that you're talking about?
Initially, the watts are expended to create the Bitcoin. Once the Bitcoin is created, watts are expended for the right to change the ledger, the blockchain.
Okay.
Okay. So again, no one entity, person, country controls the blockchain.
Got it.
And this is why there's a national strategic importance of this, because if Russia gets enough Bitcoin miners and a big enough operation, then they could control the network. And this is why Jason's sounding the alarm and saying, hey, we need to make sure that we have enough control in this network that we don't cede it to other bad actors. Just like we wouldn't want Russia to have most of the destroyers or aircraft carriers in the world, we want a force of those of our own. We want there to be some balance in this.
Is there a way, with using analogies, metaphors, whatever, for me to understand how owning a bunch of Bitcoin can give me the control of the blockchain?
It's not so much who owns it. It's a matter of who has the infrastructure in place. Right. The key thing with Bitcoin is if you're using that as a technology and if you're protecting digital assets with it, for example, let's use a kind of a silly example.
Okay.
Might bring it home for folks. So you and I both have email accounts, and you and I probably both receive spam email and phishing attempts every day.
Every day.
An easy way to stop that would be to attach a small cost to every email that is sent.
Okay.
If you were to email me, I'm going to charge you a small amount of money. And based on the number of emails that you and I send every day, that would be tiny, the cost. But if I'm a spammer and I send out 100 million emails a day, then that cost becomes prohibitive.
Right.
The idea is you could do this with a permissionless network like Bitcoin to secure email and would stop hacking and phishing attempts instantaneously because it would become too costly to do it. Okay. Okay, so that's one way to use Bitcoin as a security technology.
So if right now I don't have any way to charge somebody to send me an email. And I know I've heard people talk about this, fraction of a penny, kind of charging system. So if email was connected to this blockchain world, then all of a sudden I can start charging somebody a fraction of a cent, or even more than a fraction, maybe a whole cent, in order to send me an email. So you would maybe have to pay a penny to send me an email. And you're saying that when it gets to big numbers, then it's not worth it because I'm not going to get a penny's worth of value from sending that email.
Yeah, and furthermore, if the email is coming from Russia, the cost is higher. Furthermore, if you know that there's a server sending out spam email, you jack up the cost big time on that server.
Got it.
Right, there's things you can do dynamically to change it very quickly.
Okay.
You could also apply the same logic then for any computer to talk to any other computer that there's a small payment.
Mm-hmm.
And you've probably heard of a DOS attack, denial of service attack, where you've got all these servers hitting one server at the same time,
Right.
and it's overloading it.
Right.
It's a bit like you going to the front door and there's 1,000 people knocking on your door trying to get your attention.
Okay.
You can only talk to one of them at one time. All the others are just noise. In fact, they preclude you from having a conversation with any one person.
Sure.
Same thing happens to servers. And so you could mitigate that by making these other servers pay for the right to interact with your server.
I see.
Right. So a lot of the problems today that we have in cyberspace could be dealt with very easily by having some kind of micropayment system that's attached to Bitcoin, for example.
Okay.
Okay. Now, I can hear the criticism. Some people say, well, the Bitcoin network can't handle that many transactions. True. Think of Bitcoin as kind of a base layer, or kind of like a Federal Reserve where the big transactions settle.
Mm-hmm.
You could have other layers where the microtransactions are settling. You don't need so much security with that small amount of money. You need the security at the base layer.
Mm-hmm. So
it's not just Bitcoin. There's layers to this that come into play in terms of what you're using it for. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure you're probably going to explain this, but I may be jumping ahead, but it's just, if I don't understand it, I don't think the audience is going to understand it. And that doesn't mean that you guys aren't as smart as me. It just means that would be a base level of understanding. So, if I have that information that I'm trying to avoid, well, let's go back to email to make it simple. If I start charging $1, my friends aren't going to send me an email.
You wouldn't charge $1 to your friends because you know who your friends are.
So I can differentiate between who it is that I'm charging.
Yeah.
If I only charged a penny, my spammer might still think it was worth it.
Correct. Although the spammer's probably sending out 100 million emails.
But I'm just saying he might still think that he still might.
Well, maybe. But at that point, if you can identify that someone's a spammer, then you just jack up the cost.
I see. So you can jack up the cost until it becomes prohibitive.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the first email for, Cialis gets through at a penny. The next email for Cialis is going to cost them $10.
So would this also then be true for, Google at a massive level in terms of attacks on their computer? They could make it $1 billion to access the computer, and at some point people won't do it. Is that the idea?
That's right. It becomes very cost prohibitive very quickly.
I see. Okay.
Yep.
And the reason why they can't do it without paying the $1 billion is because they can't get past the key. The key, they have to pay so much for the key.
Yeah, in essence. Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe let's address this. This guy's asking, can you be precise on what you mean by secure? And the third question there, are you talking about using Bitcoin as a means of authentication? In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. But here's Jason's answer on that.
Okay.
So he says, in our three-dimensional world, physical world, we secure our assets by imposing physical costs on potential threats. Mm-hmm. For example, we protect gold, but with massive vault doors that intruders must physically break through.
So there's a cost.
Time and money
to do that. Okay.
Yeah. We secure national borders with military defenses that adversaries must physically overcome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Armies secure land by imposing physical costs, measured in watts, on adversaries operating in, from, and through land. Okay. Navy secures sea by imposing physical costs, measured in watts, on adversaries operating in, from, and through the sea. Right. Air forces, same thing, in and from, through airspace. Space forces, same thing, in and from through outer space. Okay?
Mhm.
We protect these realms physically.
Mhm.
And all of humanity has done this from the beginning of time. There's as much as we hate war, there is a role for war because it settles disputes
Right.
in a way that's final
Right.
until the next
Right.
skirmish.
Right.
Right? If you don't like what, the UN says, then you go to war and you resolve it.
Right.
And it's true of any creature on the planet. They do battle to resolve their disputes.
Mhm.
Some creatures fight to the death. Other creatures like deer, elk have antlers that they don't kill each other. They just do battle to see who the strongest is and then hopefully separate ways.
Mhm.
Sometimes there's casualties. The
Yeah, there are
antler goes
costs.
through the eye of it.
There are costs. There's
There are costs.
casualties, there's injuries, there's time,
Yeah.
there's energy expended.
Yeah.
There is emotional loss, or risk of emotional challenges. There are what do you call it? Non-physical kinds of things like family, our pride. So all of these kinds of costs are involved in any of these kinds of battles, if you will.
Yeah. But it's always a physical skirmish of some sort,
Mhm.
or at least a show of force, right? The
Mhm.
biggest
Mhm.
hippo,
Right,
he doesn't need to do battle because everybody can see how big he is.
right, right.
And every now and then, maybe one comes along and tests him,
Mhm.
right? And tries to see if he can take over that pod or whatever. But um, everything on the planet, every single species, tiny organisms to the largest, engaged in some kind of physical power struggle.
Right. And to your point, because I was in the security business, it was the first thing that I did professionally was sell padlocks and other locking devices. And the show of force, the show of your security is a big part of it. If my
Yeah,
security is really good, you're going to maybe check out my neighbor to find out how good their security is. And if it's easier, then you're going to go that direction.
that's right. Now, in the case of Bitcoin,
Mhm.
it's not only using the Bitcoin as a technology, but it's also protecting the Bitcoin network itself.
Mhm.
And this is where the US government comes in, because if you can gain 51% of the computers that run the Bitcoin network, then you effectively have control of the Bitcoin network. You could change that ledger to say whatever you wanted it to say. You could make all the Bitcoin yours and therefore control digital security in that way. So Jason's saying we want to make sure that we have our nation state in the game as well and playing on this field. Just like we have our nation state on the sea participating in that battle and making sure we have enough power that we can project.
Okay, back up. So I got to understand. So if 51%, if anybody, if CERN Basher tomorrow gained control of 51% of the computers that are creating the Bitcoin, mining the Bitcoin,
In essence, yes.
in essence,
There's a few more nuances to that, but in
methods,
essence, yes. If you had the majority control of those computers,
you could then take over all of the Bitcoin.
you would have control over the network, yes.
So
And
then,
you could make entries on the ledger that other people wouldn't be able to refute or change.
so then the goal would seem to make sure that nobody has 51%.
That's right.
If you
And
have
so
one,
that's why Jason is calling for a U.S. hash force, the U.S. government to be actively involved in making sure that the United States protects its interest in cyberspace, much like we protect our interests in space,
right?
in the air, on sea, on land, with a force of whatever we need to do to make sure that we don't lose control to adversaries in that regard.
So it
We
might
don't need 51%. We just need to make sure no one else gets it.
51%. Okay. So
Yeah.
we know that right now it's widely distributed and nobody has probably even 10%. I'm just guessing, I'm pulling that from thin air for our previous conversation about Gary Black. But anyway, it may be that nobody has even 10%, but that if the US government got involved, they could make sure that nobody was getting close to 50% by just adding whatever resources were necessary to keep that
Yeah.
from.
It's a bit like monitoring Russia to make sure they're not building too many aircraft carriers, and if they are, we need to make sure we are too.
Right. Right.
Or missiles or whatever the weapon technology is that you're worried about. You want to be aware of what your adversaries are doing and make sure that you're positioned to counter that threat.
Yes. Yes.
And Jason's saying that this is the same thing.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So he's saying that a cyber force can secure cyberspace, right, by encoding logic that adversaries can't easily hack or exploit.
Okay.
And again, that's Bitcoin as a technology.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. I'm skipping over something important. He's saying today that we secure cyberspace with basically software
I see.
that adversaries can hack and exploit.
Yes.
And he's saying that's the wrong approach. We need a physical approach. Okay, we can't rely on encoded logic or software. We need to impose physical costs for security.
Right.
Just like we do in every other realm.
Right.
So he's saying that we need to adopt a universal protocol that imposes a tangible physical cost on adversaries. That can be achieved by developing a protocol that digitizes the cost of physical power expenditure measured in watts and imposes those costs on cyber threats. And he's saying enter reusable proof of work protocols, aka Bitcoin. It's the only crypto asset that has these features.
Got it.
Okay. All right. He goes on here. He's just saying that Bitcoin's not a coin. It's really bit power. It's really at its core, it's really what it is. It's the digital projection of physical power into cyberspace. And we can use this network to physically secure information rather than logically secure information.
Right.
Okay. The problem is we're already using it to secure information we voluntarily choose to call financial information, hence why we call it a coin. But it's bigger. It's a bigger idea than just that.
Right.
Okay.
How does this impact Bitcoin as a financial tool? Does it make Bitcoin more valuable?
It would, right? Because if the demand for Bitcoin as a digital security technology grows, if the United States and other nations
Are
recognize that this is important, then the demand for Bitcoin goes up. Therefore, its value would follow.
I see. Okay.
Right? Supply and demand. There can only be 21 million Bitcoin mined. So limited supply. Therefore, if demand goes up, then the price has to go up with it.
And why is it that another coin, Dogecoin, can't set up a competing security network, if you will?
It is possible, theoretically possible, but at this point, Bitcoin has been around long enough that it has a foothold that would be very difficult for other crypto assets to replicate. Also, there are other crypto assets that have taken all kinds of shortcuts. They don't use the same methodology that Bitcoin does. They're not proof of work,
I see.
structures. So they don't have the same kind of security. There might be some central authority somewhere that has some say over what gets written on the ledger, or they can change the ledger. They can actually back out something if something went wrong along the way.
Would there be any advantage to having the U.S. government set up a separate, because I know they've talked about this, other sovereign nations have talked about having their own coin, if you will. Would there be any advantage to the United States in having their own system of this type in competition to manage their own assets?
Every government in the world would love to be in control of this. But that's what makes it so beautiful, is that none of them can.
I see. No, I'm saying, does it make sense would it make sense for the United States to come up with a U.S. coin, a completely separate system doing exactly the same thing?
They would want to, Randy. It's a bit like you and I creating our own money. We'd love to. But ultimately, it's better for everybody if we don't.
I see.
Right? It makes it more secure.
For everybody.
For everybody, because a lot of people don't look at the United States as a friendly country. Right. And so if we had our own system, a lot of countries would say, well, we're not we're not really interested in
I see.
participating with that.
Mhm, mhm.
But if it's something that's shared globally and no one has control over,
Mhm.
then everybody can benefit from that. And it's actually kind of interesting to the extent that the United States and Russia are trying to get control of it.
Mhm.
The more resources they put into it, actually, the stronger the overall network becomes.
Yeah, yeah.
It's Jason refers to it as mutually assured preservation rather
There
than
you go.
mutually assured destruction.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay. So a couple other things. I mean, it's kind of, what are the costs it imposes on belligerent actors? And he's saying it's reusable proof of work. It's unique in cybersecurity. No other cybersecurity functions by imposing physical costs on malicious actors. They're all some software controlled mechanisms. But if you want to try to attack somebody using Bitcoin, you're going to spend a lot of watts doing
Right.
so. And it's going to be expensive.
Right.
Okay. Much like if you and I were to develop a Navy today, it would be very expensive for us to do that. Therefore, we don't.
Yeah, and again, going back to my days in the physical security business, if I put on a little tiny padlock and somebody comes along and they can buy a small set of bolt cutters, they can break in. So I go and get a bigger padlock with a hardened shackle on it, and the hardened shackle is much harder, so they have to get a much larger. They have to spend a lot of money to get a really good set of bolt cutters, and they also have to be strong, and it'll take them longer, and it's physically more difficult to get that bolt cutter there. If I keep upping the ante, I keep on spending more money to get a better security system. They keep on spending more money in order to break in. Is this a similar situation? And how do you stay ahead of the curve in terms of spending less on your security than they are able to spend on their devices to break in?
Yeah, it's like every other military technology, and I'll skip ahead here because some of this is redundant, but this graph here, if you think about,
Okay,
military history,
sure.
let's say we started out with shields and swords,
Right,
and along comes a better technology, and let's just call it, um, you know, guns,
right.
right? There may be some other steps along the way, whatever, but let's just call it guns. Let's say you invent a rifle, Randy, and
Mhm.
I'm doing battle with you with shields and swords.
Right.
You can imagine initially when I look at your rifle, I may laugh at you because half the time your rifle may backfire on you, right? And you blow your own face off or something, right? And so I may laugh at you and say, no, my technology is superior than yours. Okay. But we know eventually, as you iterate, that gun becomes more reliable and more powerful and better. And eventually you're going to obliterate any army with shields and swords.
Sure.
Okay. So to answer your question, there's a constant arms race. That's why
Okay.
they call it that.
Okay.
To spend money on this new technology to make sure that you're keeping up with your adversaries. And if you
Right.
don't, you're going to get beaten by that technology.
Right.
And there's countless examples in history of a new technology coming along and destroying the current power.
Yes.
Jason tells a story about Emperor Constantine, and Orban the engineer comes along. He's invented the cannon.
Right.
And Emperor Constantine says, no, thank you. I've got the finest, whatever in the world, army in the world. Your cannon looks flimsy. It looks like it's going to blow up in my face. I don't want it. A year later, Constantine's dead,
Right.
right? Because Orban the engineer, I believe, went to the Ottomans and said, here's my technology. They said, thank you. And then a year later, Emperor Constantine's history. That happened to the United States with airplanes.
Sure.
Turn of the century, our military and Congress didn't see any value to airplane technology
Mhm.
as a method of warfare. You look at the Wright brothers airplane, and you could see why. Like, why
Right.
would that be a military use?
Right.
Pretty flimsy thing. It's invented by guys that make bicycles. What do they know about military technology? Nothing. Okay. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, we got the message pretty quickly about how superior air power is,
Right.
right? And we pretty quickly turned things around. But that was not looking good for us up until
Right.
that point.
Right.
So here we are faced with this again. We have a new military grade technology that we can invest in or not. If we don't, we'll probably get beaten by it.
Okay.
Our cyberspace will be less secure. So yes, there's a certain amount of spending that all adversaries will have to do to keep pace with each other. But in this case, it only makes the world safer and stronger and more secure. Whereas the spending on nuclear weapons kind of only makes the world more risky.
Sure. Although people have made the argument, of course, mutually assured destruction was the best thing that ever happened in the 50s. So,
Yep.
Okay, all right. I think I get it. All right. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a long journey to understand. I'm just touching on this today.
Yeah.
Jason wrote his thesis. It's a 400-page document.
Wow.
The book used to be available on Amazon. It was banned by the U.S. military.
What?
Right. The ideas in there were so controversial, they didn't
Wow.
really want them out
Wow.
there. I believe it's under review.
I see. Okay.
Now, there are PDFs of the book floating out there on the internet. I have a PDF. Happy to share it with anybody.
Wow.
I also have a copy of the book, but I'm not giving that up. But I would encourage anybody that really wants to understand this to read Jason's book. I'm not doing this justice. I'm just introducing this idea today to your audience.
Yeah.
Follow Jason on X. Up until recently, he's been very quiet about this topic, and it seems to be now coming out of his shell and feeling like he can talk about it.
Interesting.
A good person to follow to understand Bitcoin in a different way than what you might get anywhere else on X about Bitcoin as, a speculative asset.
Sure.
Right. Now, there's parallels here. When the Chinese invented a black powder, it was invented by a bunch of Chinese physicians, I believe, or people in the medical community. And they knew this powder had some interesting properties, and one of them was kind of explosive. And it kind of sat on the shelves for, I don't know how long, a long time, because they didn't really know what to do with this black powder. Well, eventually they discovered that effectively what it was gunpowder. Right. And the Chinese certainly, were masters with fireworks and exploding things.
Yes.
But for years, they didn't think of this as a military technology. They thought of it as medicine. And we've got the same kind of narrative shift that we have to make with respect to Bitcoin. We're all thinking of it as money, when in reality, it's a security technology.
Right.
Now, it just so happens that if it's that secure, then it would make for good money.
Yeah.
So ultimately, yes, it could be great money. But for now, the opportunity, I believe, is in cybersecurity.
Wow.
And to the extent that it's used for that and demanded for that, then yes, the value of Bitcoin will go up. Absolutely. But please don't be mistaken about what it really is. Anyway, it's for those that are interested, this is quite a journey to go down to begin to understand what Bitcoin is in this way. But I think worthwhile, particularly if you're focused on different technologies. And by the way, Tesla owns a chunk of Bitcoin.
Right.
Yeah. And so Tesla and other companies that own Bitcoin may actually play an important role in the U.S. Reserve, to the extent that gets up and running. So talk about another business opportunity for Tesla down the road.
That's right. Super interesting, CERN. Definitely a little different path for you and for this channel, but I do know that it's tied in. It's definitely tied into everything that we're talking about in terms of these supercomputers, in terms of XAI, Tesla's own supercomputer. And as you point out, at Tesla, Elon's interest in the entire blockchain and the use of it for a coin, or for bits, I guess would be a better way to say it.
That's right. Yeah. Now I would be severely lacking here, Randy, if I didn't finish off with some Cybertrucks.
Of course.
We didn't get to do this in our show from yesterday, but here it is today. I posted this photo of me seeing another Cybertruck on my trip, and I
Right.
shared that with you through last week. And this guy, Cybercraft, at Swiss Pixelcraft, commented, and it caught my attention. He says, "Not going to happen anytime soon to me, but who knows?" And so I looked at his account, and he has a Cybertruck in Switzerland.
Wow.
And of course, any photo of a Cybertruck in Switzerland is going to be incredible
Yeah.
on these Swiss
Oh
roads.
my gosh.
So anyway, I'll finish with that today. I've led you on a few twists and turns today, and I thought this was an appropriate
Oh,
image to end on.
there you go. Very good. Very good. Nice bookend there. Nice bookend.
Thank you.
Well, CERN, never failed to amaze so now my brain is going to explode. I'm going to have to go, I don't know what do I do? Do you have to take a nap to keep your brain from exploding, or I'm not sure what the cure is.
There's a few strategies. Some of them are healthier than others. But probably just some exercise would be the best.
Exercise. Oh no,
Or sleep.
I'd much rather do so. What a horrible idea.
There's a
Okay.
few controlled substances, I suppose, Randy, that you could partake in, but I wouldn't recommend
those
that
either. What am I going to do? All right. We'll let us know in the comments below if you hate exercise and you don't do controlled substances and your brain is exploding. What's the alternative? All right.
Drive a Cybertruck, I think, would be a good one.
There you go. If my wife didn't have the Model Y at work, I guess I could just go out and hit the pedal 0 to 60 a few times.
And when the officer pulls you over and says, "Why were you speeding?" you can give him my name and blame me.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. All right, sir. As always, thank you so much for bringing us very cool stuff. And to all of you out there, it's been great talking to you.
Thanks, Randy.